Over the next few lectures, we will learn how to work with strings. And so we're going to be taking a look at a couple of useful string methods. Now, I could have divided this part about strings into many more lectures and go really deep into some topics, but I think it's best to just quickly introduce you to all the topics here and then keep using them in future projects, because we work with strings all the time in JavaScript. And so you will see these methods being used all the time throughout the rest of the course. Anyway, this is going to be really fun, so let's get started. And in this part of the section, we're going to leave the restaurant theme behind and work on stuff related to airplanes and airlines. So that's something that I really like. So let's now start by creating an airline variable here. And I'm using tab air Portugal. All right. And if you want, you can use some other one from your country maybe. But then you might have to adapt the examples. So as a plane, I'm using a string A320. Okay. And now let's do some stuff with this. So just like in arrays, we can get the character of a string at a certain position. So for example, plane at position 0 should be A, right? So let's load this here, and indeed we get A. And the same, of course, for all the other letters, 1, 2, for example. And so indeed, you now get 3 and 2 here, but both of them are still strings. So if we wanted them to be numbers, we would have to convert them. And we can do the same directly on a string. So we can just write the string, and let's write B737 now, which is a Boeing. And so this works the same. Okay, so now we got the B. We can also read the length property of strings, just like we can in arrays. So let's say airline.length, and again we can also do that directly on the string. Okay, there you go. Next up, let's talk about methods. So again, comparing strings to arrays here, strings also have methods, and some of them are quite similar to the array methods. So one of them is the index of. So I believe we talked about this one when we talked about arrays. And so this one works the same way. So we can get the position in which a certain letter is in the string. So let's use R here. And so here we now get the position number 6. And so let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, and that's where this 6 here comes from. So you see that strings are also 0-based, right? And we could observe that already up here. Now this here will only give us the first occurrence, but sometimes we might need the last one. And so then we can use last index of. Last index of. And so that is 10. So this one was 6, then 7, because the space, of course, also counts as a character, then 8, 9, and this is position 10. All right. And we can also search for entire words. So, for example, for the occurrence of Portugal, and so that is at position 8. And this one is actually case sensitive. So if I search with lowercase, then we get -1, because this can now not be found in this airline string. All right. Now, what can we actually do with these indexes? Why are they useful? Well, one good use case is to extract part of a string using the slice method. And the slice method needs indexes as arguments. And so therefore, sometimes it can be very useful to first figure out the index of part of a string to then extract that. So let's see how the slice method works. So airline and then dot slice. And let's write 4 and see the result here. All right. So the result is Air Portugal. And the reason for that is that this here is the begin parameter. So basically it's the position at which the extraction will start. And remember that this is 0 based. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 4 happens to be this A, and so this is where the slice method starts to extract. And now this result that we get here, so just this here, is called a substring, because it's just a part of the original string. Now this does not change the underlying string, okay? Just keep that in mind. That's because it's actually impossible to mutate strings. They are primitives, right? So if we wanted to use this string now, we would have to store it first into some variable or some data structure, okay? So this method here and all the other ones that we're going to talk about always return a new string, okay? And so that's why we can then log that result to the console like this. Now, besides the begin parameter that we already specified, we can also specify an end parameter. So let's try 7 and see the result. And so now we only got air. Okay, so this one is 4, then 5, 6, and 7 is the space here. And so what this means is that the end value is actually not included in the string. All right. So basically it stops extracting before reaching index number 7. And that's really important to keep in mind. And just as a side note, the length of the extracted string is always going to be end minus beginning. So 7 minus 4 is 3. And so that's the length here of air. All right. Okay. Now, up until this point, we have always just hard-coded these values. But of course, many times we don't even know the string that we receive yet, okay? And so let's now try to extract just the first word of this string here, but without knowing any of the indexes. And so that's where this index of and last index of here become really important. So basically that we do not have to hard code these values here. All right, so let's try to extract that first word, as I was saying. So airline.slice, and now we need to figure out the index. And now if we want the first word, we need to start at 0. But what about the end parameter? Well, we want to extract until this space here, basically. So let's find the index of that. So airline.index of, and remember that this will be the first occurrence, and so indeed we get top. All right, and now let's do the opposite, extracting the last word, so slice. And so for the last word, we want to start at the last space here. Okay, that's why we have last index of. So airline dot last index of, and again searching for the space. And now we don't need the end parameter because then if we don't specify it, it will simply extract everything until the end. Okay, but actually now the space is also included here. And so we just need to add +1, and now we're good. So that's the fundamentals of the slice method, but we can do even more with it. So let's go again here, and we can even define a negative begin argument, like this, for example, and then it will start counting from the end, or actually start extracting from the end. So these are the last 2 letters from Portugal. And finally, let's duplicate this one again. And again, I'm using this shortcut here for duplicate. Okay. So we can also specify a negative end parameter. So the begin is back to positive, and now the end is -1. So let's see. And so basically we started at position 1. So that's why the t is cut off. And then the negative n parameter basically cuts off the last character. All right. And so we will need all of these different combinations here in different situations. So it's good that you know how to use them because you will need them at some point. Okay, and now let's practice a little bit what we just learned and write a function that receives an airplane seat and logs to the console whether it is a middle seat or not. So I hope that sounds like fun. So let's write check middle seat, and it is a function which takes in a seat. And just to illustrate it, let me start by calling this function. So check middle seat. And so typically an airplane seat looks like this. So we have the row as a number here, and then the seat itself, so that's like the column, so to say, is then a letter, for example, a B. So it starts from the left and goes all the way to the right side. And in small planes like the A320 or the Boeing 737, we only have 6 seats in one row. And that means that B and E are the middle seats. Let me just write that here. B and E are middle seats. So just in case you're not familiar with how these small planes work, right? And that's also not the point here, of course. So basically all we want to do is to check if the string that we receive contains a B or an E. And if so, then it's a middle seat. And let's call this with a couple of different strings. So 23C and 3E. All right. So what we need to do here is basically take the last character of the string and test whether it is a B or an E, right? So let's get that letter from the seat. Now we'll just call it S for seat again, but I cannot repeat the same name here. So how do I do that now? Well, to extract part of a string, we already know we use the slice method. And how do we take the last character of a certain string? Well, we use -1 as the begin character. And then, as we saw up here, it will start counting basically 1 from the right side. And now it's very easy. If S equals B, or if S equals E, then let's log to the console. You got the middle seat, which is the one that no one wants. Well, let's add an emoji here. Now, let's say this one. Or else, you got lucky. Just any emoji here, just to make it different. And I think we are good now. Let's test it. And so indeed, this here contains the B at the end. And so therefore it's a middle seat. The same for this one. And this person with this seat got lucky. All right. And that's how we extract parts of strings. And that's something really important to do. So maybe if you'd like, you can play around with this some more, maybe come up with your own example. Now, before we move on here, let's just stop for a second and understand why all of this actually works. So we know that strings are just primitives. So why do they have methods? Shouldn't methods only be available on objects such as arrays? Well, that is actually true. However, JavaScript is really smart. And so here is how this works. Whenever we call a method on a string, JavaScript will automatically, behind the scenes, convert that string primitive to a string object with the same content. And then it's on that object where the methods are called. All right? And this process is called boxing because it basically takes our string, and puts it into a box, which is the object. So basically, what happens is this. So what JavaScript does is to call this string function here. Okay, and so now you see that this string here looks a little bit more like an object. And we could take a look at this here. And so you see here all of these methods, like slice, that we just used. But this is beyond the scope of this lecture. We will learn what this is a little bit later. But what matters is that this indeed is now an object. So you see, it is an object. And so this conversion here is what JavaScript does behind the scenes whenever we call a method on a string. And then when the operation is done, the object is converted back to a regular string primitive. Okay? And in fact, all string methods return primitives, even if called on a string object. So let me demonstrate this here as well. Just really quick. And actually we want here type of. And so the result of all of this is then back to being a string. Okay, but don't get confused by this. This is just the theory explanation behind why all of this works, in case you're curious. And I hope you are. Great, but now let's move on to the next video where we will continue working with strings. Let's continue with some simple string methods. And the first two are going to be for changing the case of a string. So that's airline dot to lowercase, and this doesn't require any arguments at all. And then we also have to uppercase, and these we use all the time, as you will see soon in a more real world example. And here you see that indeed they transformed the string all to lowercase and to uppercase. And again, you can of course call these directly also on a string. So like this, all right? But now let's use this on a more practical example to fix the capitalization in a passenger name. In name. Okay. So let's say that the passenger, when he checked in, misspelled his name. And so it looks like this now. And so this needs to be fixed. It should look like this. Okay. So in order to fix it, the first step is usually to put everything into lowercase here. So const passenger lower is passenger dot to lowercase like this. Okay, so basically we already have now this part here, and now all we need to do is to essentially take the first letter and then the rest of the string and put these two parts back together. So passenger correct will be passenger lowercase, and here we only need the first letter. So how do we do that? We take the first letter by using the index 0. And so this one we now convert to uppercase. All right. And now we simply need to add the rest of the string. So again, we take passenger lower, and then we use the slice that we learned in the last lecture and start at position number 1. Because remember, that will then go to index 1 and take everything until the end of the string. And so here we then put back together just the first part of the string converted to uppercase here, and then the rest of the string that we already had converted to lowercase before. Okay, and indeed, now it is corrected. Great. And of course, we could have done a function with this. And so maybe if you have the time, you can do that. So just create a function which takes any passenger name and then returns the correct one. So with the fixed capitalization. But anyway, I will now do another real life example, which is to check a user input email. Okay, so check email. Now this will not be really a checking, it will more be a comparing. So comparing emails. So let's say that we have the email of one passenger. So hello@jonas.io. But now as the user logs in, so let's say login email, accidentally they do it all wrong and they start with a couple of spaces here and then the capitalization is all completely off like this, and then maybe even another space or even an enter character, which remember is \n. So I think we talked about that in the beginning. Okay, but still this email here is actually still kind of correct and kind of valid. And so we can now still compare if these two are kind of the same. Okay, so we can now try to convert this one to this one and then check if they are the same. Because essentially, again, they are. They would be different if we had like different letters here. Then of course they would not be the same. But here it's just a matter of capitalization. And for emails, I believe that they are still valid even with the capitalization off. And so when we check user input like this, the first step is usually to convert it to lowercase. So lower email is login email dot to lower case. And then we must also get rid of all the white space here. So these empty spaces and also this enter basically here also counts as a white space. So there is even a method for that. So let's say trimmed email. And so that is lower email dot trim. All right. Let's just now log this to the console just to see. And so that looks exactly like that first version. Now, just look closely at what we did here. So we called to lowercase on this login email, stored it to this variable, and then on that variable, we called the trim method. But why do we even need this intermediate email? We could do this all in one step. So basically, we can replace all of this, and let's call this normalized email, actually. And so, again, I will start from login email, and then do it all in one step. Dot to lowercase. And now this is a bit similar to what we did before with the map set method. So this here will return a new string, right? And on strings, we can call string methods. And therefore, right here, we can now immediately call the trim method. Okay, so normalized email, and that should look exactly the same. And it does. So let's get rid of this. And these two I will simply leave as a comment here. And now just to finish, let's actually also compare them for the sake of completion. And once again, you could do this here in a separate function. So you could do a function for this behavior where you pass in two emails, one which is the correct one and one which is the one to check. And then you could return either true or false from that. So again, that sounds like a good challenge that you can take if you want. And by the way here, since ES 2019, there's also trim start and trim end, which as their names say, you can use to trim whitespace only from the start of the string or only from the end. Next up, let's learn one of the most important things about strings, which is to replace parts of strings. So replacing. Okay. And we're going to stay here again with the airlines. So let's say we have the price of a flight, and that price is for Great Britain. So let's say 288,97 pounds. And you can use any other currency sign that you want here. What's important is that here in Europe, we use the comma as a decimal separator, unlike in the US, where you use the period, so the dot. And so that's actually what we're going to do now. We want to compute the price in US. All right. And so for that, we will need to replace the pound with the dollar sign and the comma with the period. So that's easy enough. Price Great Britain dot replace. And now here 2 arguments. The first one is the one we want to replace. And let's start here with the pound sign. And the second argument is the string that will replace the first one. So let's take a look. Price US. And so that already worked. And now we need to replace also the comma with the period. So we could create another variable now, but instead we will do chaining again, just like we did before. And for the same reason, because this returns a string. And so on that string, we will immediately call the next replace method. And now we are replacing the comma with the dot. And so, indeed, now we have the price in US. Okay, but indeed, we can also replace entire words, not just single characters. So let's create an announcement that you would typically hear on the airport, like all passengers come to boarding door 23. Boarding door 23. However, usually it is called gate and not door. And so let's replace that and log the result to the console immediately. Because just like the other method that we studied, replace also creates a brand new string. It doesn't mutate the original one. And so here it's the same. And so we need to log the actual result to the console. So replace door with gate. And here it's boarding. And now let's check it out here. So here, boarding gate, but then here you actually still have boarding door. And so this replace only replaced the first occurrence of this search string here. Okay? And actually that's completely normal. That's just how it works. But we can still go around this. Now very soon JavaScript will have a method called replace all, which will work like this. But right now, here it should not work yet. And indeed, I get here, replace all is not a function. But if you're watching this video in the future, then this here might already work for you. So please go ahead and try it out. All right, but for me it doesn't work yet, but there is still another solution, which is to use something called a regular expression. Now, regular expressions are one of the most complex and confusing topics of programming, but we will still take a short look at them at some point in the course. But for now, we are just going to use a very simple regular expression to tell the replace method that it should actually target all the occurrences of door here and not just the first one. So let's again copy this here. And then to create a regular expression, we need to write the string between slashes. So not between quotes. So it turned yellow here again, which means that it's some kind of string, but it is now a so-called regular expression. Then in this case, all we want to do with this regular expression is to add this G flag here. And this stands for global. And that's actually it. So right now, all the occurrences will be targeted. And so we replaced gate here and here. All right. And just as a side note here, once more, the replace method is of course also case sensitive. So just like all of the other string methods are. Okay, and now as a final topic of this lecture, there are 3 simple methods that return booleans. So booleans, okay? And these methods are includes, starts with, and ends with. So let's create a new plane here. And that's going to be the A320 Neo. And I'm just missing here the assignment. And now we can simply use includes just like we can in arrays one more time. So they have a very similar structure here in terms of methods that we can use on them. So includes, and let's test if it includes the string A320. And indeed it does. So this airplane here is the Airbus 320 Neo, but it still includes just the A320. Now, let's say if it includes Boeing, and of course it doesn't. And now there's another one, which is the starts with. And this one is also actually very much used. I remember using it very recently. And so in this case here, it is false. All right. But then if we change this here to Airbus, then it is indeed true. Okay. So these 3 letters here are indeed the first 3 also here. So it doesn't have to match the entire word. So just AI would also be true, but AI B, let's say, would then be false. Because of course the string does not start with these 3 letters. With air B, then it would again be true. Okay? And of course this A320 is also still true as long as it is somewhere in the string. So now it's somehow here in the middle. Okay? So let's try something very simple here. So let's say that we want to check if the current plane is part of the new Airbus family. And so all we need to do to check that is to see if the plane name starts with Airbus, and we can already confirm that it is, right? And we also need to check if it ends with Neo, because that means that it's part of the new Airbus family. And so we can also use ends with. So as always, these methods here that return booleans are especially helpful for conditionals like this. Part of the new Airbus family. And indeed, this one here is. But of course, if it was just the regular A320, then that would not get logged to the console. So whenever you need to take some decision based on the contents of the string, these 3 methods are very, very helpful. And let's now actually practice that a little bit with some kinds of, we can say a practice exercise. And so here we want to check if the baggage of a certain passenger is basically allowed to be checked in. So to be allowed on the plane. So check baggage function. And then here we get the items. And let me again first call the function to show you what I mean. So basically the passenger here says what they have. So I have a laptop, some food, and a pocket knife. Then let's call this again and say we have, or I have some socks and a camera. And then let's call it a third time with the string now got some snacks and a gun for protection. Okay. So maybe some passenger would bring a gun to a plane. But so now let's make sure they will not get aboard the plane. And actually, let's change some things here. So let's make this uppercase. Let's say this person likes to write uppercase for some reason. Okay. And so this is important to show you once again that when we receive input from a user, we usually always start by putting everything into lowercase. Okay. Because that makes it a lot easier to then compare it to something. Well, let's simply say baggage here. And so baggage is basically items to lowercase. So this one we use all the time. And now we can just check if the baggage includes a knife or a gun. And in that case, the person is not allowed on board. So if baggage.includes, and so here is that method again, which returns a Boolean. So if it includes knife, or if it, so baggage includes a gun, then we say you are not allowed on board. Else, let's log welcome aboard. All right. And so now let's see here why it is so important to convert everything first to lowercase. So in this example here, this first person has knife, but with an uppercase. And so if we didn't convert this to lowercase, then this includes here would be false, because the lowercase knife is different than the uppercase knife. Okay, so let's see the result. And so indeed, this person has a knife, so they are not allowed. This person here is fine. And then this one has a gun. And so, of course, they're also not allowed. But now, if we took away this here, well, then our code is not really going to work. So let's just delete this part for now. So if we didn't have the two lowercase, then the first person would also be welcome aboard. And again, that's because knife here, uppercase, is different from this knife. And so then we would have to check for all the variations, like knife like this, or this knife, or even this. So every possible variation. And so that would be highly impractical. And so we just turn everything to lowercase. So again, so that we can then easily compare it with one standard, which is this and this. All right, perfect. So that was another fun lecture, if you ask me, and I hope you are feeling the same. Now it's time for a break, and I see you back here in the next video. This is the third and final part of working with strings. And let's start by learning about one of the most powerful string methods, which is split. So split allows us to split a string into multiple parts based on a divider string. So let's check that out. So any string works here. Let's say a plus very plus nice plus string. So let's say that for some reason we have a string like this. And now on this string, we can call the split method. Here we need to specify a divider string. So let's just use plus. And so what will happen now is that it will split up this string by this plus sign. And it will then store the results into elements of a new array. So let's see that. And indeed, we get an array which contains a and very and nice and string. So essentially everything split up by this divider string. So let's try the same with my name. dot split. And so the goal here is of having one array with 2 elements, one for each name. And so I can split by the space, and this is a very common one. And so indeed, I get this result. And this is really useful. Indeed, we can now actually use the power of destructuring to create variables directly like this. So I can say first name and last name will be the results of this split. Okay? So this here will create an array with 2 elements. And then from that array, the first one is going to be taken into first name and the second one into last name. Okay? Now we could have done the same thing with the slice method, but that would have been a lot more complicated and for longer sentences almost impossible. And like this, it's really straightforward. Okay, now let's say that we want to make the last name uppercase here, and then we also want to add a Mr. in the beginning. So we could just use a simple template literal and do what I just said, but I want to show you something else here. And that's the join method, which is essentially the opposite of split. So let's create an array which contains all I just said. So we want to start with Mr., then the first name, and so that's going to be the second element of this array, and then the last name in uppercase. Okay, and now I want to join this. And again, we can specify a divider string, and hopefully you can see by now where this is going. So let's store the result of this into new name. And then let's check it out in the console. So what do you think will be the result of this? So of the join method. So indeed, we now get one entire string here. So one string composed of the 3 parts of this array and joined together by this joining string here, basically. And of course, we could have used anything else. So like this, or even like this. So anything works here. But what makes sense, of course, in this case is just the space. So this combination of split and join is really powerful, and we will actually use this all the time. So split and join. Okay. And in fact, we can use this for something that we already did in one of the previous lectures, which is to capitalize a name. But now with this, it makes it really easy to capitalize an entire name with multiple names in there. So let's say that this passenger is called Jessica N. Smith Davis. So how will we capitalize this name here? And actually, let's write a function. So that's a bit nicer. So const capitalize name, which is a function which receives a name, and then it will do something with that. So let's capitalize name here with that string instead. And then we can also call it with some other name. So my name, for example, and you can use your own name here, of course. So what's the strategy for capitalizing this entire name? And by the way, what I mean here is to transform the first letter of each name into a capital letter. So here, Jonas, and then this one here, Schmedtmann with this capital S. Okay. Well, we have multiple words here. And so we will have to capitalize all of them one by one. And so to do that, it would be good to have them inside of an array that we can then loop over. And so now we can use the split method for that. So let's say names is equal to name split by the space. And so this will be an array. And now we can then loop over that array. using the for off loop. So const, let's just call this one word, of names, or let's call it n, which stands for name, but I cannot reuse name because that would then override this input here, and that's a bad practice. Okay, and so now here we will then capitalize this name, so this individual name. So remember how we did that in the last lecture? We took the first letter, converted that to uppercase, and then joined it with basically the rest of the word. So that's n.slice starting from position number 1. So everything except the first letter, which is letter number 0. Okay, and now what should we do with this? Well, I think we should push this into a new array, so that in the end we end up with an array with all the names capitalized, and then we can join that array together. So let's say const names upper, and start it as an empty array. And then in each iteration, we will simply push into this array. So sounds good to you? Okay. And now in the end, let's then log to the console names upper. And so now we need to join that array back together using the space as a separator. Okay. So here we practice a lot of different methods all in one function. So this is a really great use case. So let's now give it a try. And indeed it worked. So great, right? No matter how long a name we feed into the function, it will always give us the correct output. Now here is a small challenge for you, because there is another way of doing this. So basically of doing the capitalization of one name. So given what we already learned, especially in the last lecture, can you think of a different way of doing this? And if you can't, it's not a problem at all, but maybe you can pause the video here for a minute or two and think about this. So let me just show it to you quickly, because I think this is really interesting, that we have different ways of achieving the same thing. And so this time, what will we push into the array here is simply n, and then in there we replace the first letter with the first letter in uppercase. So let me write that. So that's n at position 0 and replaced with n at position 0 to uppercase. Let's give it a try, and we get the same result. All right. So again, we are here simply taking the word, and then we replace the first character, so that's n at position 0, with the first character to uppercase. So that's a completely different approach than this one here, but it gives us the same result. Now next up, let's talk about padding a string. Now padding a string means to add a number of characters to the string until the string has a certain desired length. So padding, and let's just create a message here. Go to gate 23. So now let's take a look at padding here. So I will take message, and then I can say pad start. And so this will then add some characters to the beginning of the string. And the first argument here is the length that we want for the string. Let's say we want it to be 25 characters long. So after the padding. And then the character that we want to pad the string with. So let's use plus, and let's take a look. Okay. And so you see that it added all of these here. And so now the length of this entire string here should be 25. Okay. So let me show that to you with another string here. So if I said Jonas and then the same, you would see that it would add a lot more of the plus signs because the initial string is shorter. So you see, we have a lot more pluses now, but in the end, the string is also 25, or actually 23, so mistake here. So now the string is also 25 long. And so we see here that this has exactly the same length as this one here in the console. All right. Then there's also pad end. And so we can now take the result of this and immediately also pad the end of the string. So pad end. And now let's make it longer. And then again, the plus sign. So this will basically then add 10 pluses to the end of the string because the result of this string here is already 25 characters long, right? And so onto this one, we then pad it all the way until the length of 35 with some more pluses. And so we're going to add 10 of them. Let's just do 30 so we can easily see that. And so indeed, it now added 5 of them here. And just for the sake of completion, let's do the same here with my name. And this here just to 20 to make it a bit more even. All right. But now let's actually use a more real world example of padding here. So when you see a credit card number on the internet, you never see the entire number, right? So usually we see the last 4 digits and the rest is masked with some symbol. So let's implement a function that actually does that masking. So this is going to be really interesting. This is a great application of string methods. So mask credit card function. And so we're going to receive a number. Okay, so an actual number. And let's start by converting this number to a string. So string. Now we learned how to convert a number to a string in the fundamentals section, right? So that was like this. Remember? However, there is a nice trick that actually makes this easier for us. So we can just take the number and then we add an empty string. And so the result of this will be the number, but as a string. And this works because, as you hopefully remember, when one of the operands of the plus sign is a string, it will convert all the operands to a string. And so then this number will become a string plus the empty string. And so then it's going to stay exactly the same. Okay, so in order to know what we should do here, let's one more time first call the function before we actually write it so that we know what kind of input we get. So mask credit card, and let's say now the number is this one, and I'm just putting something random here. But of course, it will also work with strings. And no matter how long it is. All right. So as I was saying, usually on the internet, we can only see these last 4 digits. And the rest is masked by some symbol. So what we need to do here is basically to take out these 4 numbers and then use pad start to create a string with the same length as this initial number here, but with some kind of symbol there. So let me just write that in code. And then I hope it will become clear. So we're going to take the last 4 characters of this string. And so we use slice with the negative parameter again of -4. And now here is what we're going to return. We will return a last. So that is just these 4 characters. And then we will pad it at the start all the way until the original length of the string. So string.length, and the character we're going to use will be this star. Okay? And so since we return something to make this function a bit more real, now we need to log the result to the console And to start, let's actually make a slightly simpler version so that we see that it actually worked. So a shorter number here with just 8 digits. And so the end should be 7836 and then beginning with 4 stars. So let's see. And yeah, that worked great. Right? So again, we took the last 4 here and then we padded the rest of the string until it matched the original length of the string, which was 8, and therefore 4 stars were added. And the same here, and the same here. Awesome. That's really fantastic application of this method, I think. And now to finish, the last simple method that I want to show you is the repeat method. So repeat. And as the name says, this one simply allows us to repeat the same string multiple times. So let's say there is some bad weather at one airport. So when that happens, they usually have those long messages on the screen, like with the text repeating, which then keeps running and repeating all the time. So let's call this one message. So let's call it message 2. We already have message up there. So let's say bad weather, all departures delayed. Okay, and now we want to basically create a bigger string repeating this one here multiple times. So that's easy enough. We just take this string, call repeat, so repeat, and then the number of times we want to repeat it. Let's say 5. And there it is. So this is all the same long string. We should just add one space here at the end. And so you see, now you can see it even better, that it's all just one big string with the same message repeating over and over again. Or we can also simulate that due to the bad weather, there are now many planes waiting in line for takeoff. So let's create a fun function for that. So planes in line, and here the number of planes. So console.log, there are n planes in a line. And then here we can kind of show that graphically using an emoji like this. Let's say plane. I'm going to use this one. And so this here, in fact, counts as a string. So let's create a string with that and then repeat it. And we will repeat it as many times as there are planes waiting. So planes in line. Here we have 5 waiting. Then let's call it on another airport where there are just 3 planes waiting. And then 12. So indeed, now we have 5 planes, here 3, and here 12 planes. All right. Okay, cool. Now we didn't talk about all of these string methods that exist, but if you want to check them out, you can do so on MDN. And what I like to do is to simply search for one of the methods. Let's say string replace. And then that will take me to that page of replace, because then on the left side, at least when the window is a bit bigger, so then here we can see all of the different string methods that we can use. So we used split, slice, repeat, pad start, pad end. But as you can see, there are even more here. But actually we talked about all of the most important ones. Maybe one that you can check out is, let's see, concat maybe, or there should one be called reverse. Well, actually it is not here. But anyway, as you see, we talked about most of the most important string methods here. And so I hope you had fun with this. and I see you in the next video, where we then have a challenge where you can then use all of this knowledge that you just gained here over the past 3 videos. Welcome back to the last coding challenge of this section. And this one is going to be quite a bit different from the previous ones. So in this one, I want you to write a program that receives a list of variable names written in the underscore case, and your program should then convert them to camel case like this. Okay. Now the input will come from a text area that was inserted into the DOM using this code below here. Okay, so this code here created the text area, and this one the button, using the create element function, which you will learn about later. Okay, so that's where the variable name list will come from, and the conversion will happen when this button here is clicked. Okay, and here is the test data. So this is what you will take and paste here into this text area, and as you click the button, you should produce this output here. Okay, so 5 separate console.log outputs. So essentially 5 different results. Okay, so here are a couple of hints for you to solve this problem. So first off, you need to remember which character actually defines a new line in the text area. So I hope you can remember that. Then, the second one, the solution only needs to work for a variable made out of 2 words. For example, in this format, a_b. So that's exactly what we have here, right? Then number 3, start to solve this challenge without worrying at all about this here. Okay, because this actually is a little bit difficult. And so start by only creating this variable name in the camel case notation. And finally, I also want to let you know that this challenge is quite difficult on purpose. Okay, so once again, I really want you to challenge yourself. But in case you're stuck, of course, you should not get frustrated. Instead, you can just start watching the solution, and then, if that helps you, you just pause and continue. Then, once you made it work with this test data, you can of course also use your own. So pause the video now and take all the time that you need, and I see you back here as soon as you're ready. Okay, and let's start by attaching an event handler to the button. So to this button here. So all we have to do is query selector, or actually document.querySelector, and then we just select the button element, right? And then add event listener for a click, and then a certain function. And the first thing that we need to do is to get the value out of the text area. And for that, I already put you this snippet of code here. So let's grab that. And just to start, let's log it to the console. So paste that here. And indeed, it is basically one big string containing all of this. All right. So how do we now separate this basically into 5 different strings to start with? Well, we remember which character defines a new line, right? Because that's going to be a great starting point to split up this string into multiple pieces. And so that's going to be, let's say, rows. And so that will be text.split. And that new line character is \n. So let's see. Let's log rows now. And so now we should get an array with 5 elements. And of course, we need to first paste it back here, click this button. And so indeed, we now have this result here as expected. And now let's just simply loop over this array and in each iteration log this variable name here converted to camel case. So, simple enough, for const row in rows. So first off, the first thing that we need to do is to, now I clicked here, now it's gone. But anyway, let's take a look at this case here. And indeed, let me copy it down here so we can always take a look at it while we are developing. Okay, so we need to, let me also write the result underscore case. So it should become this. So to do this, we need to first split this variable name here also in its two parts, which are separated by the underscore right now. So each word here is now called row, right? And so we split that by this underscore. But actually that is not enough because, as you know, camel case should be all lowercase except for this second word here, which should start with an uppercase. However, here actually we have some uppercase right here, and here even worse, this entire word. Also, we have some weird spacing going on. So here we have this space, here even two spaces, and so we need to get rid of both of these. And so just like before, we can use two lowercase, and then we can also use the trim method on that. And then we can even chain a third method, which is then that result of splitting it into words. Okay. So we end up with an array with two words. And so let's destructure that into two variables. So first and second. Okay. And then we are already well on our way to building the output here. So let's call it output, and it's going to be this string with simply the first word, because that's already good enough. And now we just need the second word capitalized. And we already did that a couple of times. And so let me show the second version that I showed you, which is simply, well, second dot replace. And what we want to replace is second 0, so the first character, with second 0 to uppercase. And then logging it to the console, and I think that's already it. So I wrote this here quite fast because I already explained everything before, but of course you can keep pausing the video to take a look at what I'm doing even more closer, and maybe also really analyze what I'm doing. Okay, now we get cannot read property replace of undefined. So what that means is that second is undefined, and so therefore we are getting a weird result from this here basically. So let's use some console.logs here. So let's log the row first and second, just to make sure, or just to see what's happening. And we can get rid of this console.log so it doesn't get in our way. Then paste that here, run it, and we get 0, 0 undefined. Well, that's weird. Everything looks correct. Oh, here, this should actually be off, not in. And actually there is an older loop called the for in loop, which I didn't show you because it doesn't matter anymore. But that's why we didn't get an error as I wrote the in here. So let's see if now it works. And now at least this result here makes sense. So this is indeed the row, this is the first, and this is the second. But now we get some other error here. So the 2 uppercase. And yeah, that's here because I didn't actually call it. So I just wrote the name of the method without calling it. So that was another bug. But this is one more time good to show you that bugs are actually a common thing in software development. Anyway, we see that actually our variable names are already correct. So all of them are converted to a camel case. So let's get rid of that console.log here. And now let's tackle this last part here with these emojis here. But you could, of course, use any other sign. So 2 things to notice here. The first word has 1 check mark. The second one has 2 check marks, then 3, 4, 5. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that they all start at the same position. So this means that all of these strings here basically should have the same length. Okay, and how do we do that? How do we give all of them the same length? Well, we can use padding, right? In this case, we use pad end and set them all to a fixed length. Okay, so let's do that here first. So pad end with a length of 20, and the string to pad should be simply an empty string. So let's see, and it will look the same, but as we select, we see that actually now the selection continues, which means that there is indeed some empty spaces there. And in fact, when we want just empty spaces, we can actually omit this second argument and just call with 20, and then the result is going to be the same. So then after that, let's just add the check mark. And so here we now need to return or to log a template string, which will contain all of that. So here the emoji, and yeah, okay is the way to go here. And so this should be almost now the correct solution. Let's see. Okay, so all the emojis now start at the same place. But now all we have to do is to add 2 here, 3, 4, and 5. And for that, we are going to use the current index in each iteration. Okay. Now remember how we can get access to the current index in the for off loop. So we're looping over an array here. And so to get the current index, we need to actually use the entries of the array. Remember that? So we say entries, and then here the row is now actually an array with first the index and then second the actual element. And so let's destructure that here right away, where I is the index and row is then the actual element itself. And then here we can use that index to basically repeat this string. So you see, this is a lot of work and it's quite a challenge again. So I didn't expect you to really make this on your own, at least not in a very fast way. Maybe you took some time and then you made it, and so then that's really great. But anyway, it's very good to challenge yourself and bring yourself to the limit too. Anyway, here we now took this string, and then on that string we called repeat, just like we did before with the airplanes. And then we want in the first iteration 1, and so that's going to be here 0 plus 1, because we always need to add 1 because it starts at 0. So give it a save, paste our variables here, and yes, that is the solution. That's amazing. Let's add another one here. Jonas SCH. And let's see. And indeed, it now is also in camel case and with 6 OK emojis here. Okay. So this one here is from the previous time. So each time we click the button, of course, this will get logged here. Okay, so that's it here. So make sure that you really understand how strings work in JavaScript, so you can review this lecture and the last 3 lectures. And if you want even more string exercises, you can let me know in the Q&A section, and I can then give them to you. Anyway, that's it for now. I see you in the next one. So over the last couple of videos, we have learned how to work with strings and also did a couple of exercises and one challenge. But many people have actually asked me to create even more string exercises. And so in this lecture, we're going to solve basically one more challenge and do one more nice string exercise. So somewhere at the beginning of your starter files, you will have this flights string like this. And so our goal is basically to transform this huge mess here, which is this string, into this nicely formatted output, which contains all the information that is in this string here, but then put it in a way that is actually legible to people. So let's pretend, for example, that we get this string here from some kind of web API, and our goal in our application is then to display the data like this. So let's start by taking a look at our string here so that we can think about how to approach this problem. So we see that we have basically 4 lines of output here, right? And so if we take a look at the string, we can see that we have here this first part, then we have this plus sign, and so you see that here is another one and another one. And so essentially this plus sign acts as a separator between these 4 pieces of information. So these 4 flights. So this one here I showed you is the first one. Then here we have the second one, the third one, and the 4th one. Okay. So let's start by dividing that up so that we can transform this one string into these 4 pieces. And for now, I will simply log the result of doing that to the console, just so we can get a first look at this. So remember that for that, we are going to use the split method. So flights.split, and then we specify by which character we want to split the string. So give it a save, and then you see that we get this array, and this array contains now these 4 pieces of information. So these 4 flights. Now, again, you see here that we have actually 1 line for each of the flights. So that means that we want to log to the console 1 line for each flight. And so we should probably loop over this array and then create a string like this in each of the iterations. And so we also learned how to do that in this section, right? So we can use the for of loop. So let's say that each of them is a flight. And here we can then directly use flights.split, which creates the array that we just saw. And so again, to start, let's just log each of the flights here to the console in each iteration. And we can then get rid of this. Oh, and here we are trying to access that flight variable, but of course it is flights. So this string here. And so now indeed we get our 4 strings here logged separately to the console. And now it's time to actually build each of these nicely formatted string out of this mess that we get here. So again, we can notice that we have an element which basically splits or separates different pieces of the information inside of this string. So here we see we have a delayed departure, and here we have this airport code, here another one, and then here the time of arrival, which is exactly what we have in the string. So here we have delayed departure, the airport code for Faro, and then the airport code for Berlin. And so, therefore, let's extract that information from this string again. And so, again, I will start by splitting this variable, but this time using the semicolon separator. So exactly this. So you see it already worked. And now all we need to do is to get this data out of these arrays, then format each of these 4 pieces here a little bit, and then assemble each of them into the final string. So we can do this in many different ways, but what I'm going to do is to use destructuring to take these 4 pieces out of the array. So remember destructuring, we use the array syntax here, but to specify variables. So the first variable here, let's call it the type, because we can have departures and arrivals. So that's the type. The second one is the from. So you see here that the first airport code is the from, and the second is the to. So from FAO to TXL. So the third one is to, and then the last one is the time. So 1125, which we will then transform here into 11H25 like this. All right. So now, of course, we don't have the output anymore. But anyway, let's now start creating our output string here. So I'm going to call that output. And of course, we're going to use a template literal. And I will start by simply put these 4 variables that we just created in here. And so then we can format each of them individually. So that's type, from, to, and then the time. And we can already put that inside parentheses just as we have it here. And then to finish, we will just log that nicely to the console. And so now indeed we have 4 strings right here. Okay, so let's now individually format each of these 4 pieces. And I'm going to start here with the time, which is the easiest one. So here we just want to replace the colon with an H. All right, that worked beautifully. And now let's go to the type. So you see that in the type, we always have these underscores, which of course we want to get rid of. So here it should just say delayed departure with a space instead of the underscore. And here in the arrival, we basically also want to get rid of the underscore. So essentially, we're just going to replace the underscore with an empty space. So here we can now actually use that ES2021 method that I mentioned before, but which didn't work back then. But now, as I'm recording this video, replace all actually already works in Google Chrome. And so here we can now use replace all. All right. So again, this is an ES2021 method, which is brand new in JavaScript and which allows us to replace all incidents of a certain string at once. And so again, we're going to replace the underscore with a space. Okay, that's nice. Now we see here that we have this empty space at the beginning of each string, but we're going to take care of that later because we will have to add some strings here, or actually some spaces anyway, in order to create this format here. So with this and all of these spaces here. All right, so don't worry about that for now. Instead, what we're going to do now is to add these red dots here. So these are actually emojis, and we will add this emoji whenever the departure or the arrival is delayed. So basically to symbol that there is a delay. So this applies to both departures and arrivals like this. All right, so basically we want to add this emoji whenever the type, so which is, remember, all of this, so this here, so whenever this starts with the string delayed, then we want to add this emoji here. So let's do that. And we actually have a nice and easy string method for that, which we already talked about. which is the start with. So start with, and so here we are asking if the string starts with delayed, so actually like this, and remember that this is going to return a Boolean. And so this is perfect to then use a conditional like the ternary operator to return something in case this is true. So in case it is true, here we want to add this emoji. So we can just come here and copy it, paste it here, and if not, then simply add nothing. All right. Well, that didn't really work. All it did was to add like another space here, which is this one here. But I think I know what the problem is, which, and let me actually show this to you by logging here again the type. So we are looking if the string, so if the type string starts with delayed, but in fact, it does start with underscore delayed at this point, right? And so therefore, we need to add that here to our test as well. And then it works just like expected. Nice. So let's take away that log here, and let's actually take away that space. And so now we have a more evenly spaced text here. Great. And actually, we're almost done here. All we have to do is to now format these airport codes. Now, we have all of these numbers here and here as well, but they don't really serve any purpose here for formatting this string. So all we want is the 3 letters here, which any airport code is made of. So it's always just 3 letters, but the number afterwards, we don't care about it at all. So basically what we will do to this string and also this here is to take the first 3 letters and then convert them to uppercase. And then that's actually it. So let's do what I just said. So we use the slice method to take the first 3 elements. So from position 0 all the way to 3, where 3 is not included. So we're taking 0, 1, and 2. And then we can simply chain the to uppercase method onto that, and there we go. So that's fao now. And now we can copy the same thing from here to here. But let's actually not do that. But I will create a small refactor outside here. So basically create just a small function called getCode, which gets a string, and then from that string, it does this. So let's cut that, and that's it. So just a nice and simple arrow function just for this small use case. And notice how I defined this variable here outside of the loop, because otherwise this function here is going to be defined over and over again, which is not necessary. So now we can just wrap this into parentheses and pass it into getCode. And so that will then take this string, pass it into this function, which will then do the formatting that we wanted, and will return it. And let's do the same thing to the destination. And that's it. So we are almost done now. So a string is nicely formatted. It looks just, or at least almost like these ones here. Now the only thing that's different is that here they are basically all aligned to the right like this. So that we have these airport codes here and the times all in the same position, which makes these strings a lot easier to read. And do you remember how we can do that? So for that we can use the padStart method that I also introduced some time ago. So we can do that on the entire string, which ends right here, right? So the output string starts here and ends here. And we now want to apply the pet-start method on the entire string. So we can chain that right here. We could also put it here like this, but this formatting should actually be a part of the string itself. And so let's actually add it right here. So let's try 50 here. And remember that by default, the default character that will pad the string is an empty space. So if we give this a save now, then you see that indeed everything is now actually aligned here. But 50 is apparently a bit too much. Let's try 20, which is not really enough. Let's try 40 here maybe, or 30. This has to be a little bit like trial and error until it looks nice. But 36 it is. So now everything is nicely aligned and all these strings are now exactly 36 characters long, which is exactly what this pet-start does, right? So it makes sure that the string has exactly this length, and if it doesn't, then it keeps adding the string, or so the character that we define here. So we could also do like this, and then it would add this character here, but we simply want a space, so we can just get rid of that, and then automatically it adds this empty space. Okay, and that's actually it. That solves the problem that we set out to solve in the beginning, and on the way we practiced many of these methods that I showed you before, and we also used the ES2021 method here, replace all, for the first time. So I hope that you found this exercise useful and that you're now even more comfortable working with strings on your own.